Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Saving and Paying for Higher Education. My name is Kelly Blount, and I'm the Program Marketing Specialist here at General Electric Credit Union. We're so glad you've joined us as we have a lot of great content ahead. We wanted to thank you all for tuning in from the comfort of wherever you may be tonight. And with that, I am actually going to go ahead and pass it over to Todd Moore with Trinity Debt Management to introduce himself and take us through tonight's topic.
Well, thank you, Kelly, and thank you for everyone for joining this evening. It's great to be back with the credit union, and also I'll be introducing my colleague this evening, Mr. Joe Wilcox from Kentucky 529, but we're so glad to have you join us. Tonight we've got a very timely topic. We've heard so much in the last few years about college debt and the increases in just overall student loan debt. As we know, the last few years, we have had a number of programs that allowed students to place their student loans into various programs. Many of those programs are now ending, and students will have to resume payment. And we can only anticipate that folks will be struggling with their repayment, having been a period of more than 2 years where some students have not made payments. Now, I say all that because tonight, what we're hoping to do is share with you information that's going to provide a broad background about the various ways that we can help our students minimize their overall student loan debts. And also, we'll walk you through some of the options that are available. And tonight, we're going to focus particularly on the 529 plan. So, I'm with Trinity Debt Management. I've worked with the credit union as a partner for many years now. And I will tell you, one of the things that I see most often on a credit report is high student loan debt, and many students just struggling to make payments on their student loan debts. So the sooner that we can help our students, navigate student loan debt, figure out ways to help them minimize those long-term costs, that's really our intention tonight. And I think we've got some great information ahead that is going to help you as parents and others that may be joining us to help folks minimize those overall debts, particularly as we get into the details of the 529. So I wanted to share some examples with you. I looked at some recent numbers. This is from Experian. When we look at just overall college, this is, again, very broad number, but on average, $39,000, for roughly $40,000 for a 4-year degree. Now, depending on what type of school you're attending. Now, I can certainly say, having looked at credit reports for a very long time across Cincinnati, I've seen those. This, to me, appears on the low side. But students certainly, when we look broadly, we're looking at about $40,000, assuming a $40,000 4-year degree. Now, what we're going to look at tonight is just how do we as parents and how do we as folks that are helping, whether you're grandparents or others who may be on the call, rather than having our students go and borrow large amounts of money, the goal really is for us to try to supplement borrowing or even help them to the furthest that we can to pay as little as they have to borrow. That's really what we're trying, minimize the borrowing. Because right now, again, as I look at credit reports here in the Cincinnati area, this number appears small. So $40,000 just as, an in-state tuition, we're going to use that number as kind of a baseline for our presentation tonight. But you can look at various schools yourself to kind of get a view of how much colleges are actually, what is the actual cost of college, in real time? What is the college expense? Nationally, we're looking somewhere around $40,000. Well, it really depends. For many of us in the Cincinnati area, whether we're looking at UC, whether we're looking, maybe a little north of here, say University of Dayton, Miami University, I'm still paying all my own student loan debts from Miami and grad school. But as you make plans and you're trying to figure out, what's the total cost I'm looking at, I wanted to share a really great resource with you. This is the it's the Department of Education net price calculator, and you'll see that listed here on the slide. So what this tool will do, as you think about overall costs, we think $40,000 maybe nationally as a number. I looked at the calculator for current prices at Miami University, excluding housing expenses for a 4-year degree at Miami right now is $64,000. So as we think about, how we're saving, how much is it going to cost for us to save, whether we pay, 50%, 80% of that cost. Tonight, I'm even going as low as just saying, if we could even make a quarter of that payment, 25% of that overall cost through saving through a 529, we've already done our family and our students a great service by minimizing their overall student loan debt. So, but you can use this calculator to look at the various prices. What I excluded, at least in my calculations, housing expenses, that number will certainly go up much higher as you look at yearly expenses, including housing. But just looking at tuition expenses broadly, for many of the schools in the area, $40,000, $60,000 at minimum in our Cincinnati community. But we may have folks that are on the call tonight that may be thinking, hey, I may be looking at out-of-state tuition, or you may be thinking about where you might want to go, or your children might want to go to college. The net price calculator is a fantastic tool because it'll log you right into the main campus of schools where they have branch campuses, and you can start to make decisions about affordability, where you want to go to school, and compare prices, those sorts of things. So I want to encourage you as you start to think about the overall expenses and tuition expenses for college. The net price calculator through the Department of Education, really a great tool. I think it's very beneficial. I spent some time using it myself. Encourage you to use that tool as you start to make assumptions about your overall prices and overall what you might be able to afford, and how we use one of the plans tonight, particularly 529, to help you minimize that overall expense. Here are some examples when we look at just public versus private expenses and whether or not that you are in-state or out-of-state tuition. Again, these are kind of broad numbers. Certainly, if you've done some initial homework with college, we know that private is always more expensive. Public universities, there's certainly for in-state tuition is lower. But this gives us a range, again, of just what we're looking at in terms of planning. As we think about our overall finances and what we may be able to afford, this kind of puts things into perspective. Do I really want to look towards a private school at this point? What's my income allow? What's a really good option for me to look at? Maybe a 4-year university in-state here in Ohio, Kentucky, wherever it may be. Again, all part of the planning process when you use a 529 and figuring out how much we can afford. But number of schools here in the Cincinnati area, when we think about funding overall expenses, we've got access to the federal loan program. We've got access to using the 529 or other savings tools. But this places, again, understanding what those costs will be. And if you want to be very specific here about your overall expenses, again, use the net price calculator, and you can kind of play around with some numbers to get an idea of what we're actually looking at in terms of overall expenses. Now, the question then becomes, how soon should I start doing this? Well, with all, when we think about investing or saving towards paying for college, certainly we want to start sooner than later, okay? And even some of my numbers that I may share with you here, I've kind of assumed that I'm 5 years out. Maybe, I'm not looking at starting from, my child's infancy. Many of us, that's just, with all the other things that we have in front of us, housing, cars, paying on our own debts, we're in various places in terms of when we start. But assuming, again, just minimum, if I can start 5 years out, the tools we're showing have a significant impact in decreasing the overall amount that you would need to borrow. Certainly, we want to encourage you to start as soon as possible, now, if possible, but we recognize there's also other priorities and other constraints. Now, as we think about going into putting money into a 529 or just thinking about college savings, I want us to just pause for a moment and think about just an overall financial plan. Before we start down this path, a couple things that I want to share with you. Right now, we look at 401 contributions in our retirement. We don't want to offset retirement just to think about, college savings at this point. As I said, with all financial plans, we really got to set some priorities. And 529 is certainly going to be a reoccurring expense, part of a longer term savings plan. So we want to start this process as soon as possible, but we want to make sure that other parts of our financial plan are in order. So one thing that if you joined webinars before that I've talked about on the webinar series, particularly with our budgeting work that we've done, if you're not contributing at the match with 401k expenses, certainly want to get you involved in that. I can speak firsthand, having worked with financial planners in the area and been involved in the Cincinnati community now, partnering with folks for more than 17 years. This is one that I see that's just completely underfunded. Folks need to take advantage of their match. I'm going to encourage you to do that as you start this work towards the 529. Let's make sure that we've got the retirement piece of our financial plan. Let's get that in order. Also, we've talked a lot about emergency savings. Again, I hate to even say the word, but COVID-19 depleted for many of us, have wiped us out in terms of our emergency savings. Many of us are rebuilding those funds, and we've certainly, through General Electric Credit Union, done a lot of work in trying to encourage folks to get back into that process. Let's start that fund again. Let's work. If you've not created that and not doing that work now, again, another plug. Let's get busy doing that. That's part of our financial plan. Debt reduction. We also want to think about this as well. Every dollar that you have going towards debt is a dollar that we don't have that goes towards a 529. We need to reduce our debts as we do this work. So I'm kind of using the FICO 30% rule. If you're looking at credit cards, let's get those card balances down at least 30%. And if not, further, but minimally looking at 30% as we pay those down. I'm going to show you two different budgets as we think about planning for this reoccurring expense, which will be part of our financial plan towards a 529. We want to treat it as a predictable monthly expense. So the next two budgets that I'll present to you, that's the intention. We're putting money towards this overall goal. This is a longer term financial goal at minimum 5 years. Again, looking at how we increase this 529 contribution, we need to treat it as something that's a reoccurring expense. I'll show you how to structure that so that you can get that work started. And then lastly, we've also talked a lot about just cash expenses, tracking those cash expenses. Again, this is all tied back to some of the budgeting work, but these are steps that I'm encouraging you to do now so that we reduce our overall debts, meet our retirement contribution goal. And once we've got some of those pieces in place, now we're ready for that next step, which is what we're talking about tonight, really taking an earnest effort in getting those funds into a 529 and really helping our students be able to afford college. I'm just going to briefly talk about these two budgets as we do the work. I won't spend a great deal of time. Many folks have probably seen these budgets before. But again, in terms of setting overall priorities, 529 and college savings being part of that overall goal, this is for someone who's on the call tonight that needs some structure and you want this to become a reality. Okay, we need to tie it back to budgeting. Okay, so the 50-30-20, this is again kind of a broad budget, but looking at income and expenses, we meet our overall expenses. 50% of that should be tied up to our required expenses. These are those things that we, groceries, utilities, those things that we're paying, our household expenses. But you notice here, we build in a savings, 20% is built into savings. Now, part of that can be, 529 can be built into that. So let's say, for instance, that we're trying to start this account. Our goal in terms of meeting that 20%, at minimum, we're looking at, a deduction of at least $60 per week that we set up just to go into a 529. So I was looking at this 5-year goal. Let's go back to Miami University again. We're saying, okay, we can't afford the $64,000. Maybe that's not doable for us in terms of time. You know, we've gotten to this point with all the other things, becoming a homeowner, buying a car, all these various things that we try to do. I'm at the 5-year mark. I got to get started now. So if we're projecting that out in terms of weekly contribution, you know, and let's say that we want to get to at least 25% of that overall expense, you can start down this path as a savings goal, $61 per week. Okay, $61 roughly going into this account. I should have probably used a whole number. But anyway, what I'm saying is that roughly it's $60 per week, you know, times 5 years. We break this into that weekly increment. You know, we arrive somewhere close to $16,000. That's 25% of that $64,000 cost of Miami University for a 4-year degree. You know, that's a 5-year goal. You have to have these pieces in order to reach that goal. Okay, so 50, 30, 20, I won't belabor the point. What we're trying to ask you to do here, set up a budget, make certain that we're meeting those other priorities, build this into your savings goal. Now, the great thing, and Joe will also be talking to you about this as well, but we want to treat the 529 as a reoccurring expense. Okay, so we've talked about this before, the money flow budget. Again, setting things up in a way that it's automated. So thinking about income and expenses, let's focus just narrowly on the expense side. So in this particular case, as we would treat things like a mortgage, utilities, cable, cell phone, those types of things, in this case, that $60 that we talked about, that's a reoccurring expense through this particular budget. You can work with the credit union to have that withdrawn from your account. Okay, so you can set it and forget it. That's the one thing about the money flow budget that's really nice. As part of those reoccurring expenses, part of your contribution over the next 5 years, breaking it down into small increments. You know, we think about, you know, the number of weeks, I think it's 260 weeks that we're looking at. Every week we're putting $60 into the 529. We're building that account. You know, our goal is to get somewhere around that $16,000, reduce that $64,000 down to, you know, at least we're going to be able to contribute 25% to that goal within 5 years, just giving us kind of a hypothetical. And Joe will talk to you about how there's benefits in the 529. So that's your portion that you're contributing, but I believe others can also contribute into that process as well. So you could even get higher return through time. So again, going back to the money flow, for those who have already budgeted for a while and you're kind of comfortable doing that work, now we can move towards what's called a money flow budget, set the $60 into action as a reoccurring expense, and then meet that longer term financial goal. All right, so let's get back thinking about just these college savings options just for a moment. So what I'm going to do here, before I hand things over to Joe, I'm kind of just giving you the lay of the land, a broad overview. If you were today to go out to look at various plans that are offered for college savings, I'm going to present to you the ones that you're going to come across in your own research. I would imagine to be the ones that are these are the plans that you see as reoccurring plans that are offered in the market today. And hopefully after this next few slides, as I pass it off to Joe, there's a reason that we're focusing on the 529 tonight. Okay, now as we go through these slides, one of the things I want you to be aware of is when we're looking at these college savings plans, what is its overall impact in terms of the FAFSA? That's the access to the federal student loan program. Okay, transferability, whether between individuals or states, schools. Okay, and contribution limits. Okay, and taxes. All of these come with each one of these have these provisions kind of built in. And there's a reason why we're focusing on 529, because when we're looking at those factors, the 529 really, in terms of its advantages, it just offers more advantages. Okay. So 529, as we talked about, this is a plan that you make those contributions. Let's assume again, we're putting $60 into the 529, this account's earning. There's tax when you're, you know, Joe will talk to you about the taxes and how that works and those contributions. But again, I'm going to focus on the second bullet point. Okay, when we're thinking about, there's a formula that schools are going to use, and you'll see this on the net calculator that I presented earlier through the Department of Ed. So it's cost of attendance and then family contribution. So many students are going to have folks work with them. 529 certainly has advantages in terms of counting that as income. Okay, so 529. Another plan that you'll see out in the market is the mutual fund accounts. Again, think about this as investing in a large mutual fund, but look at the bullet points that I've included. You know, capital gains taxes here, and then impact to FAFSA, the Federal Student Loan Program. Okay, you got to understand those provisions as you make choices and which plan you want to put your money into. Okay, so when we look at mutual funds, think about FAFSA and transferability again. Custodial accounts, the way this works, again, can be a mutual fund type of account, but it's 18, 21, 25. It's paid out in certain increments at certain ages. But again, notice the third bullet point here. Custodial accounts are counted as student assets on the FAFSA, you know, which means they can reduce a student's aid package by 20%. Okay, so that can be a large amount of funds when we're looking at how this custodial account works, as opposed to the option presented in the 529. U.S. savings bonds, well, I was going to joke and say they're pretty solid. Here recently, we've had some issues at Congress, but again, when we look at savings bond, thinking about the contribution, what we're looking at here, $10,000 per year, okay, and risk-free. The thing is that they don't grow very much. So as you go through this process, again, and thinking about your options as opposed to a 529, I think what you'll see is savings bonds is not as advantageous in terms of its overall growth capacity as opposed to what Joe will present to you with a 529. IRAs, again, can be used for education expenses, but take a look at this last bullet point. What we're talking about is largely retirement account, not necessarily the best vehicle for college savings, okay? Although it can be used, but again, taxes and whether or not it's the appropriate tool for the job. And then I will go through just this last slide, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Joe Wilcox, but then the Coverdell, okay? So again, similar to a 529, but certainly not the same. What we're looking at here, particularly if you're thinking about graduate school, I'll have you go down to the third bullet here. We talk about, you know, beneficiaries, all these contributions at this particular plan, you have to make those contributions before they're 18. Whereas in a 529, if you're saying, okay, I don't have 5 years right now to plan, but maybe I have plans for my son or daughter to go off to grad school. Well, then again, the 529 is a more attractive option because it's not time bound by 18 years, okay, as an account. It goes off into further years. So grad school planning, again, advantageous for 529. So again, lots of different options here. You know, I would encourage you as you think about putting funds together, certainly applying. Not everyone's going to get a scholarship, but if there's options there, apply for that when we're thinking about reducing the total cost of college, okay? Summer employment, encouraging our young folks to work. Summer employment, putting those funds away into the 529. Take advantage of the dual enrollment and College Credit Plus that's offered here within the community. And then lastly, we always want you to work with the credit union. For many of the folks that are on the call, maybe they are looking at various loan products. The credit union certainly has those options available to help you meet overall college savings. So that is a very quick run through, folks. And at this time, I'm going to introduce my colleague from Kentucky, Mr. Joe Wilcox, who will share with you details about the 529. And thank you so much.
Okay, so my name is Joe Wilcox. So I am the field representative for KY Saves 529, and I have worked in the financial services industry for almost 20 years now. I started out as a financial advisor and worked quite a while in the banking industry. And since 2019, I have been with KY Saves 529, which is Kentucky's official 529. So a lot of good information here tonight. We're going to dive a little bit deeper on 529s. But as you can see, there's lots of choices when it comes to saving for higher education, any type of education past high school for your children. But the easiest way to do it is, my opinion, is to use a 529. You don't have to worry about a lot of the other things that Todd was mentioning, income restrictions, or who you open the account for, or how it's going to affect the FAFSA. It has a very, very minimal impact on the FAFSA. So really just the easiest way to save for college. Very easy to set these accounts up, very easy to understand. Every state has a 529. Ohio has an excellent 529. They actually have two 529s. So one is what we call a direct plan, where you sit down at your computer and you open your account yourself. But Ohio also has what we call an advisor plan. So if you decide that doing it yourself is not what you want to do, you can look to use the advisor plan with any advisor that you're comfortable working with. But again, very, very easy to set up these 529s. In Kentucky, we have one direct plan, so you go online, you set it up yourself. But what is so great about 529s? So really, 529s were designed specifically, in 1996 was when they were first introduced. They're designed specifically to help you save more, to really simplify the college and post-secondary savings, help you to save more, make it easier to save. So some of the big benefits that you got going for you with 529s, number one, are the tax benefits. In Ohio, you have an excellent tax benefit. You can actually deduct up to $4,000 off your taxes for the contributions you make into your 529. So a great way to help you save more. And then plus, once your money is in your 529, it's growing tax deferred. So that means you don't have to report your earnings every year. It's growing tax deferred. And as long as you withdraw to pay for education expenses in the future, you don't pay any taxes at all on your earnings, as long as you're using your savings to pay for education. So huge right there, those tax benefits. The plans are very flexible and affordable. Here in Kentucky, we don't have any minimum balance requirements. Ohio's 529 plan, you can start with as little as $25. So very flexible and affordable in getting started. And then, one thing about saving for education, couple of, if you take away anything, tonight when it comes to saving for education, two things are really important. One is starting early as you can possibly start. When your child is born, obviously that's about as soon as you can start. You could actually start before your children are born if you wanted to. There's a way to do it. But starting early, number one, factor, makes it easier to save. If you're starting earlier, that out-of-pocket expense is not as great because you have more years to save. And then also the second thing you want to try to do for a long-term savings goal like education is to get a decent return on your savings. So, unfortunately, most people do not know about 529s. A lot of people have maybe heard of 529s, but don't really understand what it's all about. So they'll basically just open a savings account and start putting money in a savings account to save for education. So, a lot of savings accounts are not paying that great. Here recently, the rates have gone up. But, once we get through this phase of our economy, those savings rates will start to go back down again. So a savings account is not always the best way to save for education. You want your money working a little bit harder for you. And obviously you want to start as soon as you possibly can. So getting a return, having those investment options is huge. And 529s have excellent investment options. Again, really easy to get these set up, very intuitive, easy to understand, and get you going to a better return on your savings. And then also 529s come with different gifting and rewards options that can help you boost your savings. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. In Kentucky, we also offer a couple of additional benefits. So one is our financial aid benefit. If your child, if you're a resident of Kentucky, these benefits would apply to you. So every state has a 529, and each state tries to give a little bit extra to their residents. So in Kentucky, we have a financial aid benefit. So if your child ends up staying in state and goes to a school in Kentucky, the 529 balance is not counted at all when it comes to determining need-based financial aid for your student. So a great benefit. And also in Kentucky, if you open your account while you're living in Kentucky, but later on you move away, your child grows up and wants to come back and attend a state school, they could do so at in-state tuition rates, even though your family's no longer a resident. And for Ohio, again, Ohio offers a tax deduction. So what they try to do for their residents is the tax deduction, which is huge, up to $4,000 a year. So all these things working together just make it really easy to save and help you save more. They make your money work harder for you, keep more in your pocket because you're not paying taxes. So you just can't get these kinds of benefits with just a plain savings account. So we mentioned tax deferral. So you can see here by this example how you can end up with more in the long run with tax deferral. And you can also see how your money's growing faster. So again, another great reason to use a 529. In a regular savings account, you're going to have to report your earnings every year and pay taxes every year. But with a 529, once that money is in the account, it's kind of like your own little tax shelter. You don't have to report your earnings. You don't have to shave a little bit off to pay taxes. So that's why your money's growing faster. It's kind of like a snowball that's rolling downhill, picking up steam, because you're not shaving a little bit off every year to pay those taxes. And you can see there that in the long run, you're going to end up with more. So the tax benefits around 529s are huge. Okay, so let's look at all the ways that you can use your savings. So one of the biggest misconceptions around 529s is you can only use it to pay for tuition. Another big misconception is your child has to get a 4-year degree. But those are probably two of the biggest misunderstandings around 529s. So really you can see from this list here, there's lots of different ways you can use your 529 plan savings. It's not just for tuition. So you can pay room and board. Your child could live off campus in an apartment and you can use your 529 to pay for it. Meal plans, books, fees, supplies, computers, software, all those are eligible expenses. And your child does not have to get a 4-year degree. So, not everyone is going to grow up and want to go to college and get a 4-year degree. So you can use your savings to pay for vocational school, trade school, apprenticeships. You could save the money for graduate school or medical school or law school. It's good at public, private universities. It's good in all 50 states. So if you open up the Ohio plan, you don't have to worry about your child staying in state, and being, just limited to the schools in Ohio, because no matter what 529 plan you have, you can use that savings in all 50 states. So you can see how flexible 529s are. When these plans were put together, they were designed to work with all the families out there. So they're designed to work with just about any type of education that your child might want to pursue after high school. And you can see from this list here, you can also use a 529 to pay for K through 12 private school tuition. So a lot of people don't realize that. It's something that was added to 529s just a couple of years ago. So you can use a 529 if you wanted to pay for your child's K through 12 private school tuition. So another great way to use a 529. Here in Kentucky, we actually get quite a few families that use their 529 to pay for their children's K through 12 tuition. So some of the nuts and bolts around 529. So anybody can open a 529, you know, the majority of these plans are opened by parents who are saving for their children, but grandparents, relatives, even friends can open a 529. Doesn't matter how much money you make, you can open a 529. You can have multiple accounts for the same child. So a lot of times we have situations where the parents own an account for their child and then the grandparents have a separate account for the same child. So that's perfectly acceptable. Another great thing to remember about 529s is you can always change the beneficiary, and I'll talk about why that's important here in just a minute, why, you know, changing the beneficiary is important. Another thing with around 529s that you might not realize, you could open one for yourself. You know, if you're thinking about going back to grad school, if your spouse is thinking about going, you know, back to grad school or pursuing, you know, some career training, you can actually open an account for yourself or your spouse because there's no age or income limitations around 529s. So, you know, the biggest question we get around 529s is, what if my child doesn't go to school? So, you know, what happens if I put money into a 529 and my child decides not to use it? Obviously a big concern. But again, 529s are very, very flexible. There's lots of things put in place to you know, account for this scenario. I mentioned changing the beneficiary. So if you have more than one child and one decides that they're going to college and the other child decides, it's not for me, you can change the beneficiary to the child that is going to go to college. You can change the beneficiary to any member of the family. So it doesn't have to be a sibling. You could change it to yourself, to your spouse, to a cousin. So any member of the family could be a stepchild. So you can always change the beneficiary down the road. You know, if your child decides they're not going to go to school, they graduate high school, maybe they don't know what they want to do, they're going to take some time to decide, you can leave the money in the account. You don't have to take it out. There's no time limits on when the money has to be withdrawn. So maybe, you know, a couple years down the road, they change their mind, they decide they're going to go to college. You know, you just leave the money in the account. It continues to grow tax deferred. Another thing that's just added, it's so new, I don't even have it on my slide, but now if you have unused money in a 529, you can now roll it over into a retirement account. So you could roll over unused 529 plan funds into a retirement account for your child. So if your child doesn't use it for education, you can roll it over into an IRA and put that money aside for their retirement. So, you know, 529 is a personal account, just like any personal account you own. You can always take the money back at any time. You know, nobody's monitoring how you use the money. Unless you get audited by the IRS, they're going to want to see receipts and things. But this is your personal account. You can always take it back. So if you need the money or your child's not going to use it for education, you take it back. So in that situation, that's called a non-qualified distribution. So if you're not using this money for education, you make a withdrawal, you're going to have to pay income tax for that type of withdrawal. Plus there's a 10% penalty. There is an exception for scholarships. So if your child gets a scholarship, let's say $10,000 scholarship, you could withdraw $10,000, do whatever you want with that $10,000 withdrawal and not have to pay the 10% penalty on that withdrawal. So that's huge for a lot of families, because a lot of families are worried about what if they put money into a 529, their child gets everything paid for, which doesn't happen very often. Only 1 or 2% of children actually get everything paid for. So in 98% of the time, you can use your 529 scholarships that your child receives, grants and things like that. Most of the time, those kind of grants and scholarships are going to pay for tuition. You can use your 529 for room and board and books and fees and things like that. So don't worry about putting too much money into a 529. Don't worry about, you know, what might happen if you get scholarships. You can always use your 529 in conjunction with grants and scholarships. So another great thing about 529s is you can save with other people's money. So as Todd was talking about, you know, a lot of times we have young families, they're struggling with their own student loans. They have a child, you know, they're trying to save for their retirement, trying to put together an emergency fund. So a lot of times, you know, there's nothing really to save, especially for families that are starting out. But what you can do is help get other people to help you save. So you can actually open your 529 and get what's called a U-gift code and share that U-gift code with your friends and family. And then they can use that to make contributions directly into your child's account. So, let's say you have 5 people out there that are willing to help you save for your child, and they're going to do $50 on your child's birthday and another $50 around the holidays. So that's an extra $500 a year. If you're saving over a 10-year time period, that's an extra $5,000. So U-gift is a great way to help boost your savings, and something that can only be done with 529 plans. And then U-Promise is another way to boost your savings. So this is a rewards program. So when you're going to the grocery store, you're shopping online, you're dining in certain restaurants, 1.529% of your savings is going into the 529. So, another instance where you can save with other people's money. You can save with the U-Promise money, so you're out there shopping anyways. Why not have a percentage of your spending go directly into your 529 contributed, on your behalf from U-Promise? So a great way to help boost your savings with 529s. Even, if you're a young family starting out and you don't really have a lot to save, you can always do U-Promise or U-Gift to boost your savings. Also, estate planning is another way to boost your savings. There's special IRS rules around gifting. So if you have members of your family that are older, they've accumulated some wealth and they're starting to think about, giving that wealth away to the next generation, making a gift to a 529 plan is an excellent way to do that. A single person could make a gift to another person of $85,000, into a 529, and that giver does not have to pay any gift taxes. So this is a huge savings and a nice incentive for making a large contribution to a 529, and then couples could double that up to $170,000. And you could, if you have somebody in your family that's well off enough, they could actually do this every 5 years and not have to pay any gift taxes on these contributions. So something to think about, if you have family members who are older and starting to think about, how to distribute their wealth. So, I always talk about how easy 529s are, and that's one of the things I like to emphasize a lot around 529s. They're really, really easy to set up. All you basically need is your child's social security number and birth date. You go online, you can have your account open in as little as like 15 minutes. Most people get hung up a little bit on choosing the investments, but again, we make it really simple. Most of the investment choices are simply just based on the age of your child. So you correlate the age of your child with the investment. That's your choice. You're off and running. So it's really, really easy to set up is what I'm trying to say. So don't be intimidated by it. And then another great way to boost your savings is to make your savings automatic. So even if it's only doing $10 a paycheck or $5 a paycheck, if you make your savings automatic, you're going to be a better saver. Studies show that people that save via payroll direct deposit save more than people that don't use payroll. So it doesn't matter what 529 plan you have, you can set up payroll direct deposit to make your contributions, make it automatic. So that's the key, making it automatic, doing things on automatic, as Todd mentioned before. That's the way you make yourself a more successful saver. So again, here's my contact information. I'm Joe Wilcox. I work for Ascensus. Joseph.wilcox@ascensus.com. Ascensus is actually the program manager for KY Saves 529. And this is my direct phone number, so you can text, call, or email me at any time. I'd be happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd and Joe, for taking us through today's content. We'll now go ahead and open it up for the Q&A session with the time we have remaining. I know we have a couple questions that were pre-submitted, as well as if anybody on tonight's webinar has a question, you can go ahead and submit that using your question feature. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. The first question is asking, what options are out there for current students who are trying to continue to save for college as they're going through college?
You want to handle that one, Joe? Again, I would say, some of the details that Joe went through with the 529. Joe, you want to handle that question?
Yeah, so I mean, like I was mentioning, anybody can open a 529. So, if a student has the wherewithal and they're starting to, think about saving for their future education, maybe it's grad school or law school or medical school, you can open a 529. You just have to be 18 years old to open a 529, and you can make yourself the beneficiary. So you'd be the account owner and the beneficiary, and you could save for your own future education. So that could be one way to do that, to save for a student to open up 529 and save for their grad school or law school or things like that.
Awesome. Our next question says, does my child, excuse me, does my child have to attend school in the same state that the 529 account is open through?
No. So that's one of the common misconceptions around 529. So a lot of people think if I open up the Ohio plan, my child has to go to school in Ohio. So that's absolutely not the case. So it doesn't matter what state your 529 is from, your child could attend college anywhere, all 50 states. So doesn't matter, where they go to school. You can use your 529 savings in all 50 states, even overseas.
It looks like we just have a couple more questions. So the next one is, are there fees and expenses with the 529 plan?
So all 529s charge some fees, and it's based on your balance. So, it's different for every 529. So a couple of things to think about when you're considering a 529. First of all, I would encourage you to look at your own state's 529, because again, tonight we talked about special benefits that most states will offer to their residents. So you want to check that out to see what those benefits are. A lot of times it's a tax deduction like Ohio does. So the first thing you want to do when you're shopping for a 529 is look at your own state's plan and see what benefits residents get. The second thing you want to look at is the cost. So every 529 has to advertise or display the fees that are involved with their 529. And the third thing you want to look at, is how is that 529 performing? Are the investments working? Are people getting a decent return? So those are the three things you want to look at. You want to look at your state's plan, what are the fees and what are the returns? So every state charges a fee. It's based on your balance. Typically, the fees range somewhere between like 0.20 and 0.80. So for example, let's say you had a balance of $1,000 in your 529 account. So depending on which investment you choose, because they're all priced a little bit differently. So if you had a balance of $1,000 in your account, your fee is going to range somewhere between $2 and $8 annually based on the $1,000 balance. So the fees are minimal, they're not huge. You get a lot for that fee, but there is a small fee to pay, somewhere, $2 to $8 per $1,000 invested is a good rule of thumb.
And then this is going to be our last question. And I think, Joe, you briefly mentioned this during your presentation, but can you reiterate how 529 plans are taxed?
So the great thing about 529s is potentially there's no taxes at all. Okay, so the way 529s work, you start putting money in. Once your money is in that account, it grows what we call tax deferred. Okay, so you don't have to report your earnings every year. Your money continues to grow. Like I mentioned, it kind of snowballs because you're not making withdrawals to pay for taxes. And then in the end, as long as you're using your savings to pay for education expenses, you don't pay any taxes at all. So the great thing about 529s is potentially you're not paying any tax whatsoever. So that's the great thing about 529s. If you do make a withdrawal from a 529 though, and you're not going to use that money to pay for an education expense, then you're taxed on that type of withdrawal. It's called a non-qualified withdrawal. So in that instance, you pay normal income tax. So whatever your income tax bracket is, that's the tax you're going to pay on that withdrawal. Plus there's a 10% penalty. But the good news is you're only paying taxes on your earnings. You're not going to be taxed twice on your contributions. So it's not quite as onerous as it sounds, you know, even if you do have to end up paying some taxes on a withdrawal.
All right, awesome. That is going to conclude our Q&A session. Thanks again, Todd and Joe, for taking us through tonight's content. Thank you all for joining us and have a great rest of your night.